Over to this now. Is Africa still a dark continent? Well, despite the stereotype and ongoing conflicts across Africa, it has also been able to produce global superstars like Fela Kuti, Miriam Makeba, Trevor Noah, and Sadio Mane, among others. Africa is well represented on the global stage in business, the arts, sports and culture, and of course the rest of the world is taking notice of this continent. Let's talk about how vital that is. The creative talent is nurtured and retained by companies and brands as well as agencies alike. We're joined by Ciaran McKivergan. I hope I got that right, and he's the founder and managing director of 8909 Digital. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Tell us a little bit about your vision when it comes to African talent and why it was so important for it to be nurtured and retained, but also recognized on a global scale.
Yeah, so I think if we take a bit of a step back, you mentioned the dark continent earlier. If you go back and look at the representation of Africa within Western and even Eastern media over the last 50 years or however long you want to look back, up to date it still unanimously shows that they represent us as the dark continent, right? And when you analyze that and you take a step back and you notice what the economy is looking like in Africa, where you see this massive brain drain of not just creative minds, but creative individuals within different sectors, it kind of starts making you question, why are we perceived as the dark continent if all of our people are going to the West and making success there, right? If you look at a continent like Africa, we've got 54 countries, over 2,000 languages, and as a developing continent with a growing middle class and a growing youth population, it shows that there's a massive gap and opportunity there for us to create creative solutions, right? When you look globally, let's talk about the States, for example, right? In order for them to get from A to B on a creative brief, it's a pretty straight line, right? Whereas in Africa, we deal with so many cultural tensions with those 2,000 different languages and 50 countries that there are these microcosms of cultures and tensions that we need to tap into. So creative solutions from Africa far outweigh the creative solutions from a Western world just because of the environment that we live within, right? And our vision, or my vision at least for the business, is that we should be looking at exporting African ideas and solutions rather than African people, right? We want to be part at 8909 of a new diaspora where we do exactly that. We export these African ideas and solutions rather than our people, thus creating growth within our African kind of economy.
And what do those solutions and ideas look like? What exactly is it that you are exporting, if not the talent of an individual?
Well, that's it. I think, you know, there's exporting the talent with an individual and exporting the talent of an individual, right? If you look at the names you mentioned earlier, you know, historically people have looked at our continent as a continent of corruption and bribery and poverty and whatnot, but we actually are a continent of Fela Kuti, Nelson Makambo, the Mukeli studio. These are great minds that are being exported currently, and unfortunately the way it's being molded is that there's a perceived better life in the Western world because they often can offer up to 10 times the salary you're getting paid here. But what people don't realize is that it's actually a horizontal movement, right? Because you're staying in the same bracket, the cost of living is 10 times more there. So with this promise of higher pay, it's almost deluding the creatives in Africa to move over, whereas if we fostered an environment in Africa where African creatives were well represented, well paid, and were working in a space where this was pushed forward, we would not have to export those people to develop those ideas. We would sit in our world in Africa as a hub of creativity and ideas to start exporting.
And how do we do that? What kind of support are we looking at here? You mentioned pay and career or skill support, but what kind of support ecosystem needs to be created so that young talent does not have the need to travel to the West to get the nurturing that they would need to develop and grow that talent?
100%. So I think it starts, you know, there's the private sector and there's the government sector, right? Let's take a step back and look at the Department of Arts and Culture, for example. If we start there and start creating an environment where the creative industry is governed properly, there are rights, there are regulations, there's standardized pay, there are standard ways of working within the business, and there are grants from grassroots level to get this creativity fostering, we would be moving a lot further forward. But unfortunately, we don't see that money trickle down. I think there have been a couple experiments that haven't really brought real fruits to the kind of conversation.
And what about the knowledge base of the talent about understanding contracts and working with certain organizations, whether they be government or private? You know, you read it in the news all the time where certain musicians or artists or whatever have had clashes with whoever they were working with because of a lack of understanding of the environment that they're working in. That level of education and understanding, how important is that component as well?
Yeah, well, I think if you look back, you know, talking sociological theory, you know, Karl Marx says that education is the basis of any societal superstructure. Yeah. And when you look at the microcosm of creativity and the space of culture, we need to essentially be, you know, fostering that environment for that specifically.
Yeah. And then just a final thought from you, if you will. I mean, you've spoken about a lot of the talent that we've been able to produce as a continent, sporting, arts, whatever it may be, the box representing us in France at the moment. Just, are you optimistic about where we are as a continent, the kind of support we're providing, and where we're going in terms of being able to do exactly what you've been describing over the last few minutes?
Well, I think, look, I for one am very confident. I think if you look at the global market currently, I'll give you a clean little example. There was the new FIFA that came out, the PlayStation game, one of the biggest games in the world, and there are 3 prominent South African musicians on that new soundtrack, right? And you can see how this is moving us forward. So I think from a point of optimism, I for one am very optimistic just because of the pool of talent we have. I think that if that talent comes together and creates, I'm not suggesting a union, but I'm creating a board of people that look after this, who then invest in education at a grassroots level so that it can filter up. Because when you start filtering that up, you'll start seeing the trickle down across the industry.
Thank you very much for your insights. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate the work that you do to enhance the skill set that we as a continent do have to offer, because let's face it, we are brilliant.
We really are.
Even if we do say so ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is Ciaran joining us. He's the founder of 8909 and he's the digital founder there. A very interesting conversation. Don't go